actually see you moving, please. And I'm going to play our well-known. Here we go. Come on, girls. Let's get this energy up on the Wisconsin. I can't see some faces. Lakita, Safra, Katwefo, Libokan. Let's see your faces. Watching us, please put on your screen. Loretta, I don't see you moving. There you go. We are family. It's so wonderful to have you all here this afternoon on this beautiful Women's Day weekend. And I can see you all shining, as you should be, because it's your special weekend. Even though we rule the world, they only give us one day. But we got to enjoy it while we can, right? So I would like to ask someone to please volunteer to read my sister's prayer. Who would like to volunteer? Yes, so Vasile, I'm going to put it up on the screen. Please go ahead. Thank you.
I am my sister's keeper. I will build my sister up, encourage her, empower her, and pray for her. I have no reason to talk about her, tear her down, be jealous of her, or to compete with her. I am going to stand behind her and help push her into her destiny. Praise you.
Thank you so much, Cecilia. I love your confidence. Thank you so much. That was beautiful. Okay, so girls, I'd like to ask. Our last session 2 weeks ago, we talked about the art of communication. And I'd like to know if any of you have used any of the skills that you learned in the last session. Did anyone have a situation where they had to think about the things that they learned in art of communication? Can anyone remember what we learned in the art of communication? What were some of the key concepts that you learned? Alice, you were very, very vocal in that last session. Do you remember some of the key points that you learned?
Hi, afternoon. How are you?
Hello, Alice.
From last week's session, what I took away is just in terms of communication, one needs to always provide clarity, and one always needs to tell your story, and you also need to make a call to action. So those are some of the things that I took away from the session.
Beautiful, Alice. Thank you. That's perfect. There was one more. Does anyone remember there was something that was quite important about who you might be having a conversation with? Alawani, do you remember what we talked about? You on mute, Alawani?
Yes, I do remember, and okay, one of them that she didn't mention was to also inspire. So at the end, you have to, in as much as, because when we talk of communication, and sometimes we end up feeling bad, especially the opponent or the person who is wrong. So it's always good to actually inspire them to always do good. Yeah. Thank you.
Nice. There was one more, something about who you were speaking to and adjusting what you were saying to who you were speaking to. Yes, Alice, go ahead.
You need to make sure that you know your audience so that you can adjust whatever you speak, whatever you're about to say to your audience so that it's relevant to the people that you're speaking to.
Absolutely, you hit the nail on the head. So you summarized them so beautifully. So it was knowing your audience, it was your telling your story and your call to action, and then of course knowing what you want to say, knowing what it is that you actually need to talk about. And today's session is once again building on that. Okay, so we started session 1, we talked about building trust and how you build trust through communication. We then talked about courageous leadership, about thinking about what you do, thinking about how you can grow your village, how you can build your knowledge, all the aspects that will lead you to finding what it is about your mission and your purpose. And then we talked about the art of communication. And the art of communication was clearly now leading into this session, because this session is about negotiation. Oh, it's a big word. What does it make? How do you feel when you hear that word negotiation? What does it make you think of? Charmaine, what do you think about when you think of negotiation? You're on mute, Charmaine?
Oh my goodness. I don't know what to I don't know. I'm sorry, guys.
Does it make you nervous hearing that word negotiation? Put up your hands if negotiation makes you feel nervous. Yeah? Okay. There are a few of you saying yes, negotiation. So the thing is negotiation sounds like a big word, but actually we're doing it all the time. Okay? We are doing it all the time. You can think of an example today when you had to negotiate for something today. Each one of us must have had to negotiate for something today. Even the mentors can answer this one. Lebogang says she thinks of asking or pleading, okay? Nikita says having a mutual agreement. Those are good examples. But I'd love to know a chance today when somebody you had to negotiate with someone today. Anybody? Examples. Sephora says, I had to negotiation with my kids to have me time. Isn't that a real one for parents? Absolutely, especially at the moment with lockdown. What about other examples? Come on, guys. On your daily basis, you must have had to do something where you had to negotiate a little bit. Who had to watch? Who watched TV? Go ahead, Charmaine. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, for me? Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, for me, would be negotiating with my sister to wash the dishes.
And who won the negotiation, Charmaine?
What?
You won. Did you win?
I did win, of course.
Okay, I love that. Yes, that's a very simple one. I know that sometimes some of the girls say they have to negotiate about the remote control for the TV. Yes, Aliwane, you had an example. Go ahead.
Negotiating prices. So I sell jackets. So sometimes you find that one of the customers bought like 5. So sometimes I just give them a discount so that they buy more and more. So yeah.
That is an excellent example. Thank you. That is a really excellent example. Anybody else got another example? No? Okay. I'm going to share some slides with you now. So, we talked about a little bit about communication, and we talked about examples of negotiation. Okay. And the purpose of this module, this today's session is we want you to become effective negotiators for yourselves, but not only for yourselves, also for other people. And this is part of that mission, purpose, and finding your purpose. Because sometimes you're going to have to ask people for things when you want them. And you might be doing that on behalf of other people. So we talk about negotiation and we talk about advocating on behalf of others as well, okay? And when you have a voice, like you learned in the last session about learning to communicate effectively, we talked about the things that you needed to be able to do that. And one of the key things about that was knowing who you are and what you are about as a person, because then it's easier to ask for what you want if you know what you as a person are about. And as I mentioned earlier, negotiation sometimes is very technical, but it's actually not, because you're doing it all the time. You're doing it all the time. Even I went to the garage today to put petrol in my car, and guess what? There were two of us waiting to go into the same spot. And it was a case of, do you want to go? No. Do you want to go? You know how you wave at each other about who wants to go in, and eventually I let them go in. Even there was a bit of a negotiation happening right then. It's happening all the time, okay? And one of the options, there are always options when you're negotiating. It's never a win-win or a lose-lose. There might also be a no-deal situation. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that now. So, did anyone watch the video, girls? I want to know how many of you watched the video. Hands up. Yes, nice. Alice, Nikita, did you watch the video? Nice. Charmaine, I see it. Tafasila did. Alawani, Kansani, did you watch it? Yes? Yes, well done. Okay. So if you watched the video, you would have heard what Professor had to say about the U framework. Okay. The U framework. And this is such an important framework. It's important because, one, it's very simple, but two, it's important because, in fact, if you use this model, you will never be in a situation where you can't come out of a negotiation situation with some sort of positive outcome. Okay, and that's the key thing. So what are the U principles about? It's about yourself. What are your goals and interests? What are you interested in? What is your mission? What do you want to achieve? Okay, and knowing your why. And as we always say, know your why behind your what in G4G. The other thing is others. The other people you are communicating with, how can you help them achieve your goals, and who is stopping you from doing it? And when you're in a negotiation, that is so key, is thinking about what the other person may want, or what might the other person, how could they block your goal, or how could you help them achieve what they want, as well as getting what you want. And then lastly, understanding. And that is understanding the person or the situation enough to know what you can offer that person to help them get what they need, and so that you can get what you need. And there's a skill in doing that, and that comes down to actively listening, actively thinking about what is being said. So there's some important points here, all right? And some of those points are about even a simple negotiation or a complicated negotiation, there can always be an outcome, okay? It doesn't always have to be complicated. And I think what you've got to think about is the various options that you could have in any negotiation situation. One, say you were talking about a bowl of soup, for example, okay? And there's a bowl of soup, and you want to share the bowl of soup, but the other person wants the bowl of soup. So there are various outcomes that could happen here. One, the person could get, both of you could share the soup, or only one of you could get the soup, or you could possibly like give one person half a little bit of the soup and the other person gets a full portion. Or what you do is that you actually make something better from the soup. You add some bread. But it's about applying that U framework to understand how that there are always options that are available, okay? And when it comes to dealing with emotions and making sure that you're keeping a very calm mind and thinking about it very carefully. I think often, you know, with women, they say, oh, women get so emotional, they can't negotiate, etc., etc. But actually, as women, we bring a strength of empathy to any negotiation because we're able to think about what other people may need or may want to help them be successful. And so the other important thing as well is always making sure that you are actively listening. Okay. And then just some key messages which I've already talked about. You always have options when you're applying the U framework, and you must always come to a negotiation thinking about your own strengths, okay? What it is that you bring to the negotiation. It's so, so important. And always be careful of taking a stand where you're not going to budge, where you're not going to move on it. I read such a beautiful quote today by Alice Walker, which I wanted to share with you all. And she says, the most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. So you must always come to a negotiation feeling like you have power. This is so important because you do. Okay, now, what we asked is we're going to just give you an example of two situations where we're going to do a little bit of role play. Joyce, was it Joyce or Gloria? I'm sorry, I'm having it. Joyce, are you going to do?
Yeah, it's me. Yeah.
Will you do a little demonstration of a role play for us, please, on negotiation? Will you
Okay. Where's Tibu? Where's my partner? Is she here? Tibu?
There she is. She's there. She's waving.
Oh, okay. Let's start, Tibu.
Hi. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Hi. How are you?
I'm good, and how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Can I please have 5 minutes of your time, please?
We'll see if I have 5 minutes. I actually have something to do, but let's try. We'll see.
3 minutes. 3 minutes. I will try to be quick.
Okay, 3 minutes, fine.
Thank you. Ma'am, regarding the assignment that is due tomorrow, I'm here to ask for an extension. I'm asking for extension because I was sick, and then the doctor strongly recommend that I sleep. So I couldn't do the work, and then I realized that the assignment is due tomorrow and I still have a lot to cover. So I couldn't cover all the work by today. So can I please have 2 days or a day to work on it?
That's very interesting. I mean, the assignment is due tomorrow and you are coming to ask for an extension today. I wonder when you saw the doctor. I mean, it just can't work. It's very clear in the study guide, no extensions will be granted to anyone. You can't come today and expect me to give you an extension for something that is due tomorrow. I mean, you were supposed to have worked on it like from 2 weeks ago.
I understand, ma'am, but I was thinking that I could manage to finish it on time, but I've realized that there's still a lot to cover and I couldn't do it. So all I'm asking for is just an extension, and I really need that extension because I really can't finish it or go through it by a day only.
Unfortunately, my dear, I can't. I mean, it's due tomorrow. There is marking involved, and I'm not the only person responsible for marking. The papers need to go out tomorrow. If I give you a day or more, it's just going to mess things up. It's not going to work.
I understand, ma'am, that you also have work to do, but I've seen that on the study guide it stated that the assignment is due at 9 a.m. in the morning. So how about you can give me maybe until 12 midnight, and then before 12 midnight I can make sure that I submit. Before then I will try my best to work it throughout the day today and then tomorrow during the day, and then I'll make sure that I submit. Now I'm just asking for extra few hours to work on it.
I no can do. I mean, now we are moving from extra 2 days and we're going to an extra 4 hours or 2 hours or whatever that is. It's just not going to work. I mean, if you didn't work on it from 2 weeks ago, there is no way you're going to manage with an extra 2 hours. And I am closing the submission link.
But ma'am, you know that I always attend all your classes. I'm always in class. I participate in everything that I do. I never give you problem, or I've never come to your office to ask for extension. Now I'm doing this because there's nothing more that I can do. You know, I've never done anything like this before, and it will never happen again. This is for the first and the last time. That's why I'm asking for at least extra hours to work on it. If you can give me 2 days or a day, at least to give me some extra hours to see what I can do, and then I'll make sure that by that time I submit.
I get you. I know you're a good student. You always attend your classes. You always do your work. But rules are rules. I can't be doing any favors. I mean, it's just impossible. I'm sorry. Your next option would be to apply for a special, submission. Probably some weeks ago, a few weeks from now, there is a special submission, but you need to write a motivation and submit to faculty and provide them with your sick note and everything. But I really can't help you. I'm sorry.
I understand. I can work with the second option that you're giving me. That's fine. I can provide all the documents. Now, what I would like to ask from you is, can you please motivate for me or advocate for me so that they can also be lenient with me? Please. That's all
That's
I'm
not
asking
how it
for.
works, my dear. I cannot negotiate. I cannot negotiate for you. I cannot motivate for you. You have your motivation yourself. You write it yourself. You provide them with the necessary documentation. You do it on your own. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Just left. You are on your own. All the best. I can't help. I've told you what to do. You go and do it. I'm sorry.
Thank you, ma'am. I will work with what
Yeah. Good luck. Good luck.
Thank you for your time, ma'am. Thank you.
All right. All the best.
Dolly, that was so good. You really tried. My word, that was so impressive. You did not give up. You kept going. You kept going. Joyce, you were hard.
Joyce is so hard. Like, it's only 2 days.
But well done, well done. I mean, I really, you came with different options. You did exactly that. You thought of everything we talked about in terms of the U framework. You thought about what it was that would benefit the teacher. You thought about what it was that you needed. You tried to explain your case very well. You were very clear in giving your reasons. I mean, you really came from a position of strength as well. So well done. And the way you actually talked about like what the things that you are good at. You talked about I attend class and all those things. So important. So yes, well done. Joyce, sure, you are a tough teacher, man.
It happens. It's life. We have those, unfortunately, in life.
We absolutely do. And then that's the thing, is that sometimes you walk away with a no-win, and that is what happens. But the thing is, you always have to try, and you always have to state your case as clearly as you can to try and get your point across. So well done on doing that. Now, we were supposed to have another role play, but unfortunately I see my co-conspirator is not on the call, so I'm not sure. And we're also running a little bit long on time. So I'm actually going to, thank you, that was a perfect example. We're not going to do a second role play. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go straight into our guest speaker. And let me just show my screen again so that I can give you a decent introduction. Hold a moment, please. All right, ladies, today we are so honored to have somebody very, very special talking to us. And I would ask, I think Rita asked this in the last time that she spoke, that you get your notebooks out and that you make some notes, because Fasiha Hassan is an absolutely phenomenal young woman. She is a lawyer and a politician. She was a student activist and the SRC leader during the Fees Must Fall protest right in the beginning at WITS in 2015. In May 2019, at the age of 25, she became the youngest member of the Gauteng Provincial Legislature. She's the whip of the ANC Gauteng Political Education and Development Caucus Executive. And in 2019, she was nominated for the Student Peace Prize, a Norwegian prize awarded to student activists dedicated to non-violent social justice. We are so lucky to have her with us. You understand how incredibly busy she is. So thank you for joining us today, Fasiha, and welcome, and please go ahead.
Thanks for having me, Val, and hi to everybody. I think I should first, I'm so excited. When I was on the discussion sort of prep session with Val, I said, I'm so happy to be speaking to students and to young women You know, it really wasn't that long ago. I think I'm still studying now. I'm doing my master's. So this is a incredible crowd. You know, I'm very excited to do it. So yeah, my name is Fasiha Hassan. I've been introduced, and they've sort of mentioned a little bit about what I do now and what I've done then. And I'm actually very glad to be talking about negotiation. And I think you've heard around the technicalities of it. So I'm going to speak a little bit more about my actual experience, my life experience, and then sort of try and tie it into what you've already been learning and sort of going through. So yeah, I started off as a student activist at Wits University, and I was somebody who was very involved even before SRC, sort of in student politics and, you know, getting a little bit into what sort of goes on, right? And I think we all know this. The university space tends to be one that is actually quite overwhelming, especially from in a first year situation. And even, to be honest, even in second and third year, it's quite overwhelming. You know, you have very demanding academics, you have all these social sort of obligations and responsibilities, you're trying to do your best, and being a woman in the space, there's all of these issues are also around over-sectionalization, and we'll talk about that, but it's a lot. It really is a lot. And very often people think that this idea of negotiation is a very formalistic one, is one that's reserved for politicians, for lawmakers, for, you know, corporates. You know, you think it's like a UN thing, etc. And in reality, with everything that's been said, I know Val said it, everybody said it, you do negotiate every day. We may not call it negotiations, but you balance different interests and different ideas and different people all the time. And one of the things that I always think about when trying to unpack negotiation is I think about it like in a formal sense, which I'll speak to, but also an informal way. How many times have we been hanging out with friends and, you know, there's different ideas about where you should go, which place should you go out to, and you realize, oh, I'm not really into this place, or I don't like the music, or I don't like the vibe, but all your friends are very interested in going there. And, you know, small things like that, you negotiate it, right? Which restaurant to eat at, which place to hang out at, even often, you know, sort of just generally in your social circle. So you got to think about it, I think, a little bit more broadly. And I think what's really important from here is just taking the skills, which are things that you often do, but you maybe don't think about all the time. But yeah, I want to talk a little bit about a few examples in which I've been in difficult situations and had to negotiate, and talk about some of the options that were available, and then some of the things that happened. Some worked out well, some didn't work out that well. And that's also what I want to show you, that not every example is one you're going to walk out with everything that you want. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a negotiation. It would just be something where you take everything. So yeah, the first one is, and this is something that may be relatable to people. When we were in the SRC, you know, a lot of people tend to go through what we call academic exclusion. So you go through university space, it's really difficult to perform for some students, academically speaking, for a number of reasons. You get, you know, sort of ranges from people who party too much vis-a-vis people who didn't have access to textbooks, didn't have access to accommodation, had to sleep in a library, had to sleep in a bathroom. That's something I've experienced. A girl who came to me who said, I don't have accommodation, I'm sleeping in a bathroom. And, you know, sort of all these different things. And a lot of the students just can't perform well academically. And then at the end of the year, you find yourself in a situation where you're sitting at a table having to represent all these students to a university committee who's saying, well, why should we let them back? And I cite this example because, you know, we spoke now about the role play of the extension on the assignment. That's one thing that you'll come into. But sometimes the stakes are a bit higher. And sometimes you're in a situation where the university will say, well, we have 17,000 applicants for this particular course. Let's say electrical engineering, let's say humanities, let's say law. I studied law. Why should we let this particular student back? And it was a situation in which we had to balance the negotiation between representing the student and trying to get the student back, but also acknowledging that some of those cases were not clear cut. So some people will go through that process and think, well, I have to get back to university, I have to get back. When in reality, it may not be the best thing at that moment. And I'm going to give you a very particular example. We had a student whose mother, I think it was, mother or father, but mother who had passed away, and going through the absolute most emotionally, unable to perform academically, you know, just really had to keep going home, up and down, look after the family. And we had to come to a very sort of difficult negotiation, not just with her, but with the university, in which we said, well, if we do let her back in and she fails again, there's no third chance. This is the chance that she would have gotten. And it was something where we had to balance with her, make her understand, and sort of also say to the university, well, maybe the best thing for the student is to take some time off, to heal from the loss, to find a situation where there's stability at home and come back the following year to study at the university. And I'm using this example because, of course, there were many, in fact, we had a 80% success rate. We got most students back. But there were some situations where it wasn't that easy. And one where we had to say, well, there are moments in which you have to compromise for the longer term, where you have to look at the bigger picture and say, well, what am I going to achieve today versus what am I going to achieve a year from now? What am I going to achieve 5 years from now? Or even smaller than that, what am I going to achieve next week, next month, etc. And I want to put this in your mind because you need to remember that all negotiation in many ways is like you're playing out a scenario in your mind. What's going to happen if I do this? What's going to happen if I do that? And sometimes you have to make difficult decisions and you have to balance difficult interests, but ultimately because in the long run, it's the right thing to do. So that's one example of where we have encountered very difficult negotiations. But there was another one, and you'll probably know better about this one. Fees Must Fall. We started it in 2015. It continued on into 2016. And we were in a situation where the university at the time was trying to put forward a 13% increment, fee increment. And I need not tell anyone in this call how expensive university fees are. Some people are NSFAS, some people are lucky to have scholarships, but not everybody is, and especially not at that time. There were even fewer people who were funded. And we obviously tried everything. We negotiated at the boardroom, we did research, we put across all of this different case studies around students and what they would lose, etc., etc. And ultimately, that was a failed negotiation. We did everything we could in our power to try and have sort of a meeting of minds, which in some ways negotiation is. But there were some things that we couldn't compromise on. And that's what I want you to take from this example here. When you're negotiating, when you're looking at yourself, if you remember the you example, right? You, yourself, others understanding. You need to know where you stand on certain issues as a person. Where are the things that you are willing to negotiate or sort of compromise on? And where are the things that you know are just fundamentals? You can't go against these fundamentals. And in that situation in which we were student leaders, our fundamental thing was we couldn't leave poor students behind. We absolutely couldn't. This was one thing that we could not compromise on, one thing that we were not willing to negotiate on, one thing that we said, this is the make or break. And not all negotiations have a make or break. I think you have to weigh out what like I said, the first one, what's the bigger picture, what's at stake here. I can lose an argument or a negotiation with a friend about having pizza vis-a-vis having burgers. That's different. But when the negotiations are higher stakes, let's say about your career, let's say a relationship with the person, where you're not comfortable about the nature of the consent or your sexual sort of experience with that person, those are very high stakes, I would think. And you have to know where you're willing to compromise on and where you're willing to not. And so we were not willing to allow a situation in which students, poor students who didn't have textbooks, who weren't funded, who were sleeping in libraries, whose only crime in this world, crime, was to have been born poor. There's no way we were going to leave them behind. And so as much as we put across this research, as much as we tried to find these meetings of minds, we did different scenario planning, we did all of these things, we couldn't compromise on that one thing. And the university couldn't compromise on what they felt was their financial interests. They felt that they needed that money to run the university, even though we had presented a case study in which we said the increment they were asking for was too high. So we weren't necessarily initially arguing that there should be no increment. We were saying that it shouldn't be as high as it was, because over the last 5 to 10 years, it had been increasing by more than 10% every year. But ultimately, that negotiation collapsed. And we then had to say to ourselves, well, what do we have left? What tools do we have left? And it came down to a situation in which we said, well, we're going to protest. But we made a decision then not to protest in a necessarily traditional sense, right? You know, normally people would sing struggle songs, you hand over a memorandum, and that's kind of it. We had different ideas around how we were going to show the university at the time how important this was. Now, this is where I'm trying to show you there was the formal negotiations in the boardroom, but those negotiations spilled out into real life. And we needed to show the university that there would be thousands of students who would be left behind if they forced this fee increase through. And that's when we decided we would physically block the gates of the university, right? We were going to show that the doors of learning would be physically shut because they couldn't afford the fees, right? Because you wouldn't be able to come back and study, because you shouldn't be getting an education that you can afford. You should be getting the education you deserve. And so when we, on the 14th of October 2015, we woke up early in the morning, we got to the university, we literally sat in front of the gates, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, and we were very few people. We were maybe 15 people. And it was tough. It was very, very tough. But we were able to make that decision and hold our ground because we knew where we were willing to compromise and where we were not, and what was really at stake and what was important to us. And in that action, you know what happened. It grew very quickly. We started off as 15, maybe 20 people. Within a few hours, we were a few hundred people. Within a few days, we were a few thousand. And what we were able to show the university and show the higher education space and every single vice chancellor in the country, that just because we were young and just because we were not necessarily equal at the sort of equal bargaining power at the table didn't mean that we should be taken any less seriously. And that's also something I want to talk about now, power dynamics in negotiations. Often you'll find that because you're young and because you're a woman, people will undermine you. They will. And it takes a lot of yourself, a lot of hard work, and a lot of changing of the system to actually equalize those playing fields. So when we were in the university negotiating boardroom, we were 1 or 2 students out of, let's say, 25 of the board of council. And even though we made compelling arguments, and even though the research held, which we now know it held, right, because there was positive outcomes afterwards, they were able to drop that increment and they were able to say, well, actually, that was far too high. What seemed to matter more was that we were just students. We were just young people there. We were just, you know, they thought they could just brush us aside. And that's where you also need to understand that not all negotiations or all examples of negotiations, you're going to be in a position where you have the power to necessarily be that bigger player. But that doesn't mean that you aren't able to speak at the table. It doesn't mean that you're not able to be a fundamental part of the decision making. It means that we need to think creatively. It means that we need to use what makes us great as young people to sort of turn it on its head. And that's what we did during Fees Was For. We knew we were not going to win that battle in the boardroom. We tried, we did everything we could. We followed the guidelines, you know, the steps that you would follow. We knew that wasn't the case. And so we brought that negotiation to a space where we forced them to listen to us. And that was quite literally outside of that elitist boardroom and onto the ground and onto, you know, a space in which students were the most important stakeholder of that discussion about fees. Remember, there's no university without students. And often I think people forget about this, right? We think that it's only about the infrastructure. We think it's only about the academics. We think it's about the image of a university. But in reality, there is no university, college, school, etc. that exists without us as young people. And what I was talking about now around these power dynamics, we had spent months in this boardroom doing everything that we can. But on the Friday, that first Friday of Fees Must Fall, I don't know, I think people may have been in high school still then, but those wouldn't, they'll be aware that we entered into a negotiation with the university. Except this time the negotiation wasn't on the 11th floor in an administrative building away from the people who stood to lose the most. It was in what we now call Solomon Mahlangu House Concourse, with thousands of students behind us. And all of a sudden what had happened was, instead of us speaking for students in a boardroom all the way 11 floors up, there was a student who could say to the chairperson of council, that res increment that you put forward meant that I had to move out of university res into a South Point, into shitty accommodation, where I'm not getting value for money, or where I had to crash on someone's floor because of the decision that you made. And it showed those people at the negotiating table that their decisions are not academic, they're not statistical, they affect real people. They affected human beings, young people like you and me, who didn't have that voice inside of that boardroom. So it's also about finding ways in which you get your voice heard. And it's not always simple. This is obviously a very particular example, but it's about looking at what you're good at and what you have to offer and how you utilize that to your benefit. So if you're good at research, if you're good at speaking, if you're good with people, or if, let's say you're a bit shy, but you know how to write, or you know how to, bring something else to the table, find a way to utilize that when you're at that negotiating table, because that's going to be something that you can use to level the playing fields. And one of the last things I want to say on this, because I think it's also important, one of the only things we had during Feast Must Fall to negotiate with, well, let me start here. As students, we don't have a lot of money. We don't have jobs. We're not employed. Some people might be, but it's often part-time employment. It's not the end goal. What we have is society's need for us to graduate, and society's need for us to be skilled graduates, to contribute to the economy, etc., etc. What we had and what we have is the academic program. That's what we had to negotiate with. And so we fast realized that in the negotiating room, we didn't have power because it was one or two student voices versus 25. And what the chairperson of council was like, okay, let's take this to a vote. And while that sounds like a democratic thing to do, if the power dynamics are off, of course we were going to lose the vote. We were 2 people versus 25. So even though we had a good argument, even though we were fighting for the right thing, we had to change it on its head and bring them to where we had the power, which was the academic program, right? Which is what we had stopped, what we had paused, and what we had said, until you come and listen to what we're saying and actually take what we're saying seriously, we're not going to compromise on that. Now this, of course, and I want to be clear, is an extreme example. You're not going to encounter this type of negotiation all the time, but there will be times in your life where you'll have to, where there'd be a promotion at work. And here's a very good example. And I've read a lot about this. As women, we are often paid less. The sort of gender pay gap is very, very big, especially in a place like South Africa. And one of the mistakes we make, and I'm still learning it myself, is that we don't negotiate hard enough for ourselves because we doubt ourselves. We think that they owe us something, that we should prove ourselves. Of course you must prove yourself, of course you must work hard, but you also need to know your worth and know that you are deserving of more. The honest truth, you saw that I'm called a whip of political education in caucus. I'm not getting paid for that. Let me be honest with you. I'm going to share this with you. At the beginning of the term, the chief whip spoke to me. He said there are 73 public reps, 73 MPLs. We do qualify for 80, but until Parliament puts through a bill, we only can pay 7 whips, and you're the 8th whip. And I'm having the same dynamic now, because I was taken aback at the time in which he didn't say it formally, he didn't set up a meeting, he pulled me aside and said, this is the situation. And because I'm unlearning this thing right now, like today, like in this process, that I deserve better. I will do the work and I will put in everything that I've got and I will really make this thing work and it will be successful. But I also deserve to be paid for it. And I must be unapologetic about it. And so for the last few weeks, I've been thinking very, very deeply about how I'm going to bring it forward. And I want to share this with you because there's no clear-cut example. There's no like easy way out of this one. I need to bite the bullet, set up the meeting and say, well, Chief Whip, I deserve more. I'll do the work, I'll do it, but I deserve more. And that's something that I want, especially because in the next year, a few years, you're going to be in the workspace and you're going to have to do the same thing. And let me tell you one last thing. People negotiate their salary contracts all the time. Let's not be those people like, oh, wow, I've got a job and just sign. Yes, if it's your first job, you can do that. But if there's a promotion or you know that you're being undervalued, speak up, say something about it. Because the more we don't, and the more we keep quiet, the more we settle for less. And the more generations that come after us will also have to settle for less. So just remember, you're not just fighting for yourself, you're fighting for many, many, many women who are going to come after us as well. Well, I know that might be my time, and I know people are going to ask questions, so I don't want to mess that up, and I've got content, but yeah, I think it might come up in the questions as well. Oh, can't hear you.
I'm sure there are lots of questions. Thank you so much for that. You really touched on so many important points there. But I'm going to ask C on the floor who would like to ask some questions. Thank you, guys. Rivka, are you clapping? Sorry. Anybody would like to ask something? Ladies, you will not get the opportunity to. Charmaine?
I'd
Yes.
like to ask a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Oh, I wanted to ask, how do you deal with the awkwardness or treatment you receive after negotiating, maybe with the boss at work for promotion? Like, how do you make sure that the mood of the relationship stays the same, even after negotiating for what you want and you didn't get what you want?
Did you get
I'm
that?
done.
I think I got it. It was about sort of how you deal with being received potentially negatively. Is that, Charmaine, was that your question?
Yes, that's the question.
Yeah. One of the things you're going to have to learn very quickly, and I'm sure you've already started to experience this, is the moment you stand up for yourself, especially as a woman, you're going to get called names. It's part of this very patriarchal idea that because we know what we want and because we're confident, you'll be called aggressive, you're going to be called a bitch, you're going to be called a whole lot of things. But it goes down to what we were saying earlier, right? And what Val was presenting. You need to know who you are and know what your intentions are as well. And if you know that this is something that you've worked hard for, something you deserve, and something that you're qualified to do as well, then you shouldn't be as unapologetic. There will be some fallout. There will be. But it's also your approach that's important. And that's why this thing of negotiation is important, right? Needing to understand where you're willing to compromise, where you're not willing to compromise, and where you're also starting to say, well, this is something that I can see. And you need to kind of think about that before it, right? So if I'm in the situation, and I've been thinking about this for a while, if I bring it up to my boss, who is the chief whip, he could say, yeah, that's actually quite true. I acknowledge what you're saying, but here's the reality of the matter. And this is likely what he's going to say. It's COVID-19. There's not enough funding. How do we justify giving you inverted commas increase at a time like this? So I need to have an answer for that, because that's a very good point. I can't pretend that there aren't difficult conversations that need to be had. But then I also need to say, well, Chief Whip, then I can't do all this work because the time that I utilize for this means it's time I'm not working in the community, which is my actual job, right? The things that I'm actually paid to do. This is my mandate as an elected person. And then I need to balance it out and play it out. But the fact is, he'll know where I stand on the matter. And when the time comes, even if it's a year from now or 2 years from now, he knows that this is something I need to push on. And also that something I found works well. It's also, you work hard and you prove yourself. So by the time you have that conversation with someone, they've acknowledged that you're also deserving of it, that you have something to bring to the table, and that you have that potential. But it's definitely, it could go very wrong. It could be, and you also need to be prepared for that, because that's also life. In the real world, things don't always work out. In the real world, you're going to have to take quite a few punches, very hard punches, and you're going to have to be able to pick yourself up and figure out, well, right, this is something I can lose, or something this is I'm going to have to put my foot down about. And that's something only you can really determine in the situation.
Nice. Nikita, you had a question?
I wanted to ask, what is the most difficult situation or challenging situation that you had to negotiate for yourself, and whether it worked or didn't work, what did you learn from it?
Yeah, most difficult one, and I'm glad you asked it because I had it written down here. It's something I shared in a previous G4G session in a different cohort, in a different group. At the end of 2015, or around November of 2015, the former president had announced that they would freeze all the fee increments, and they were putting together this commission that would investigate the feasibility of free education, right? And so we had come back. We hadn't exactly gotten what we wanted. There was no increment, sure, but we knew that the fees were not affordable even before that increment, right? So the greater goal was around opening up access to higher education. And we were faced with a very, very difficult situation. On the one hand, we were close to losing the academic year, right? Which meant no teachers, no doctors, no dentists, no engineers. There'd be nobody, okay? Remember, we're talking national now. There would be no graduates. So that's the one side we were looking at. The other side that we were looking at is we hadn't exactly won all of our demands. And the other big demand that hadn't been won yet was the fight against outsourcing of workers, right? So workers who were employed by a third party who were very badly treated by those third party companies. That was a big part of our demands. So this side we had, and I'm going to tell you real life stories. Fourth year engineering students, civil engineering, black male, poor background, like rural background. Progressive guy, he was with us in the protests. Pulls me aside one day and says, but Fasiha, you know, the truth is, I have to graduate. I have to finish this degree. There are people at home who are relying on me to get a job so they can have food on the table next year, you know. I have to build a house for my mom. I have to do all of these things. And it doesn't mean I'm not pro free education. It doesn't, and that's what's the truth. It doesn't mean we don't believe in this goal any less. It meant that we were faced with immediate dire need. And also, remember, the economy can't function without this intake of skilled people, right? It's not going to work. We need architects, we need engineers, we constantly need these people to build the economy and to build society. So that was the one thing, and many students were of that same example. I mean, I'm not talking about privileged students who, you know, just wanted to go back to class. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about genuine poor students who were with us, but who really the stakes were too high. And then, of course, there was Ubaba and Umama who were cleaners, landscapers, etc., who were saying, but we also are fighting for dignity, and we're also fighting for equal pay, fair pay, etc. So how do you choose? And the difficulty, and I always reflect on this, is we were 21 at the time in which we had to make this decision. And there was no right or wrong, if you can see. There was a very difficult negotiation that had to happen, both internally and externally. And ultimately what we had to decide was that we had to allow exams to happen so that these poor students could be able to look after their families, grandparents, mothers, fathers, etc., but continue to fight against the end of for the end of outsourcing on this side as well. But we came under severe criticism from different sides. The very, very, very far left were like, you guys shouldn't have done that. But they were not on the ground. They were not the ones who directly represented students or were actually the ones who were dealing with this, okay? And by the way, the end of outsourcing came. It came about 2 weeks later, but we had no idea. We were just faced with these two incredibly difficult situations. And when I look back, obviously with the benefit of hindsight, you can make anything happen differently. But with the information that we had at the time, I think we did the right thing. You know, we did not lose the academic year, but at the same time, we managed later on to win this battle against outsourcing. But I just want you to see how it's tough. And sometimes there isn't a right answer. And sometimes there's like a more right way to do it, but you won't know that until after. So you need to be able to trust in yourself and in the information that you have before you to say, well, this is what I'm going to have to do. I know it doesn't entirely answer your question, but it's the most honest I can be.
Thank you, Fasiha. Alice, you had a question.
I think my question was slightly answered, but I have two questions. The first one was, so in a negotiation situation where outside of fees must fall, say in a personal space, where you can see that there's no win-win situation, in terms of the fees must fall, the solution was taking the fight to the ground. However, in a personal space, how do you handle that when you see that you are not going to get what you want from the negotiation, even whether it's a compromise? And do you let go of that, or do you continue fighting? How exactly do you deal with that in a much more personal space? And then my second question is, in terms of fees must fall, was the fight, was it solely fees and just outsourcing of workers, or there was also an inclusion of free decolonized education? And if so, where's the decolonized part now in terms of negotiation and the outcomes of that? What were the improvements that were done in terms of that? But what if we look at the outsourcing that was stopped, and in terms of free education, the increment was not, fees did not increase, but in terms of the decolonized aspects of it, what was done?
All right, let me start with the second question first. Remember, the demand has always been for free, quality, decolonized education. And that's a fundamental part. I think I just didn't bring it in, because it was more particular around the initial negotiations. But it was and is a fundamental part. And if you recall, that's actually what triggered Rhodes Must Fall, which ultimately laid the pathway for what later we know now as Fees Must Fall. The decolonization one is interesting because I think we won more battles on that in theory than we did on the fees, because those ones are more intangible, so to speak. So if you think about decolonization, it's about turning the system over. It's about saying that the system as it is not conducive and was never designed to educate people of color in a way that is empowering. So we identify different elements of this decolonization process. The one was a very particular thing, the institutional naming, statues, etc. And I'll speak to where we won a few battles there. But the second one is also around like language policy, the culture of your university, which is, I think, still the hardest one that we haven't really been able to put a proper dent in. But there's different elements. And of course, there's like decolonizing the curriculum in the academic one. And so what we managed to do in this process was force even the terminology of decolonization onto the agenda. And we won some significant battles in terms of how curriculum is developed, at least at WITS in particular. That it's a more inclusive process, that it's one that includes the narratives of the African continent. And it was easier to do in a situation like the humanities, which I think you're starting to see it in. Reading lists, I know by the time I did DLICT, or I don't know, I can't remember which law subject I did. By the time I did it, it was sort of post Fees Must Fall. And we started to see Biko's writings in the reading list, the recommended, or not even the compulsory reading list. So we were starting to already see those things. But this process of negotiation was also difficult in a slightly different sense, because it wasn't a monetary discussion, it was a cultural sort of discussion. So I remember very particularly sitting in a naming committee meeting. We were fighting, so there's this building called Senate House, which is where we would always gather during Fees Must Fall, which we now know is called Solomon Mahlangu House. And I was putting forward the proposal to rename the space to Solomon Mahlangu House. And I remember very clearly presenting, you write this proposal, you do the lobbying, you get all the signatures, this was like our thing. This was like us starting this sort of formalistic process of decolonizing the university. And there was an alumni on the board with us, or on the committee with us, old white man. And I make the case because it's not just about Solomon Mahlangu House. There's Barney Benato, there's a university race called Barney Benato, and he was contemporaries with Rhodes and, all these guys. And so I'm making these arguments about why it's important and why we have to change the names and why it's not just about a name, why, there's this lack of or indignity that one feels, etc. This man sort of in the meeting gets up and very elaborately waves his hands, because we're on the top floor of one of the admin buildings and you can have this big view of Joburg. He elaborately does this with his hands and he says, Barney Benato and Rhodes built this city. There'd be no city without these guys. And I almost completely lost my shit in that meeting. In fact, the now DVC had to sort of hold me because I was about to stand up, because he also stood up, it was about to be a bit of a screaming match. And it was in that situation where I realized that this thing of decolonization is going to hit hard in certain spaces, but we need to continue fighting for it. But what I want you to be aware of is we didn't just fight for the name change. we had gone through this proposal, we had done the research, we put together a very well thought out, well endorsed proposal. It wasn't just something that we just sort of thought about, you know. And I keep saying this because people forget. They see the outcomes and they see what they saw on TV and they think, oh, this equaled that. But it completely passed over this part, right? Which is what I'm trying to show you, and how we actually got to where we were. And your second question, it's difficult to answer because, you know, you need a more specific example. But, you know, in the workplace or in any space, let me do it like this, let me answer generally. It's useful to identify allies, okay? People who you may relate to, or people who may just understand things from your perspective. I say this because in any negotiation, it's not just you, there are other people involved and there are other interests. And often some of those people can raise your interest in a way that is more objective and in a way that could potentially get more success. But of course, it depends on the matter, right? They could even support you when you start talking or start actually putting across the issue. And also identifying, and now this is the politician in me, okay? So I want you to take this with a slight pinch of salt. But you need to also understand that everybody has something that they want or something that they wish to gain in their interest. And it's also important to identify that, because if that is something where you can do a give and a take, and I'm not talking, I'm not at all saying there must be corrupt activity or money, none of that. What I mean is that in any negotiation, even with your friends, when you're choosing a place to go out to, you know that your friend might want to go to this particular club because their ex tends to frequent it, for example, right? You know, there might be some of those sorts of elements. And you can use that information to your benefit and your advantage and say, well, actually, so-and-so, we know why you want to go here. And actually, that's not a good idea because you're likely to bump into your ex and it's going to be a dramatic evening for all of us. And, you know, we just want to have a good time. Let's rather go here. So see what I've done there, right? We've utilized information that we have for the benefit of the negotiation, but ultimately everyone's also going to have a good night because there's not going to be drama and awkwardness, etc. So that's, yeah, it's not the example you were putting across, but it's just something I thought I could use to explain.
Wonderful example. Thank you for that. Did anyone else have any other questions? Yes, Nkobile.
I'm sorry, this has been burning me. I just want to know from you, with all the things that you're doing, what is the why behind the what? You've done a number of game-changing things in my perspective, and I'm sure you'll go on to do more. But what is this thing that's driving you behind all of that you're doing?
Thanks. The simple thing, or the simple answer, and it sounds really corny and cheesy, and that's why I don't like to give the simple answer on its own, is that the world is a messed up place. Things are not fair. And if we can do something about it, we should. That's the simple answer. But the longer, more complicated answer is also that those things that I've seen, they can't sit well with us, right? When you see a beggar at the corner of a street or at a traffic light, or you see a student who doesn't have a textbook, or a student who spends all night in a computer lab because they don't have access to Wi-Fi or a laptop, or, you know, and you do have those things. That's not something that can ever sit well in your heart, you know? And I know it sounds very idealistic and utopian, but the truth is I am an idealist. I have to believe that we can do this. I have to believe that we can change the status quo. Because if we don't even try, then why are we even here? You know, I want to be able to say, and this is also part of my, like, I'm a Muslim, you know, it's part of, and it's also something that you see in lots of Abrahamic religions, right? This idea of judgment from God, or the day of judgment. And for me, I want to be able to say, whenever that time comes, and God sort of says to me, what did you do with this life that I gave you? I want to be able to list things and say, but this is what I did. This is where I tried to make the world a better place. And we will sometimes fail, and sometimes we will lose, and sometimes we will win. But I just need to know that I did everything that I could to make it better and to push a collective interest. So it sounds really corny, I know, but it's how I feel, and it's also what motivates me to keep going, even when I'm like exhausted and I want to give up. Because for me, this is not just a job. It's activism is a lifestyle. You know, it should be in every fabric of what we do. And when you live that way, you also start to see like good things come toward you as well. So yeah, that's the long and the short of it.
Such a beautiful answer. Thank you for that, Fasiha. Anybody else have any questions?
Hi, Val. Thank you so much, Fasiha. If I may just, there's one additional point I'd like to make. I think because I'm looking at the chat box and what is happening over there, I wanted to point out that the U framework is actually a chronology. You start with yourself. You need to know what it is you're negotiating for. And Fasiha, for example, said, know what your negotiables are and what your non-negotiables are. And then you consider the other side. And it's because someone asked a question, you know, whether to take a salary and it's your first job. You need to know why you're asking for that. So the why or you framework happens in that chronology. You know what your strengths are, your position of strength. And Fasiha has told us where you get your position of strength from. It's by knowing your mission and continuously reinforcing it. And then you can say, okay, then what does the other person want? What are they negotiating for? Then the you is a continuous back and forth. You now get what they're saying, you compare it to what your negotiables are or your non-negotiables, and then it goes back and forth. And I thought it's important that we understand the framework is not a standalone like a why, an O, and a U. It's something that continuously happens, but it happens in that chronology. It starts with you, the individual, by defining what it is that you want. But brilliant presentation, Fasiha, and thank you so much for speaking to the YOU framework.
Thank you, Rita. Anybody else have anything else they would like to ask?
I'm also just checking the chat box because I actually didn't check that properly before.
Don't worry, I've been watching it. It's okay. Kansani, you have a question.
Yeah, I do have a question. My question to the speaker is, where is your emotional health in the midst of the negotiation? Where is your mental health? Because such things can take a toll on you. So how do you balance that?
That's an excellent question. Yeah, I think initially we didn't at all think of mental health, and that was a mistake. You tend to think that you'll just be okay, and you don't quite realize that some negotiations take more out of you than others. And it's also what I was saying earlier, some of those high stakes negotiations are often ones in which you have so much to lose and so much to gain that you don't quite look at the mental health aspect. It's difficult for me to answer this because I don't think I've given enough attention to it, to be quite honest. And it's only something that I'm trying to watch now. And one of the things I've tried to do, because also, like we said, we negotiate on a daily basis, is also to create boundaries, right? So I often have lots of people who constantly, like, you know, when you feel like an octopus and you're pulled in all different directions and everybody wants a piece and talk, and you know, I've had to put in boundaries and say, well, what is the value of me spending my time on this thing? What's the outcome? And negotiate it through that. So, for example, I will, and that's something I've said to Val and to Rita before, I see immense value in the Girls for Girls, the G4G program, right? In empowering other young women. So I will find time, regardless of what's going on, to put into it, because it's not just about my mental health. It's something that I enjoy doing. It's something I love doing. I want to empower more and more young women. But then there are also like people who just want to squabble and talk factional nonsense politics. And that's not something that I see value in, and it's not something that I think is good for my mental health. So I limit that, right? I keep it very limited to a very particular point of time. Or if they call, you know, I don't necessarily answer the call. I'll be like, oh, I'm busy, please send a text. So I can filter out if it's a genuine question or concern that I need to address, or if it's something where they just kind of want to gossip, for example. So I think boundaries are very important, but I also think it's very important to take some time every once in a while to have a mental health day or mental health hour or whatever it is, whether it be watching series, whether it be sleeping, whether it just be being. You know, this is something we don't do enough, especially because we have phones. We live in this age where there's constantly information and content always thrown at us. Do we ever just take a moment, put our phones completely off and aside, and just sit or just lay or just be? And I think that's something we could probably benefit from, because I don't think the human mind and the human psyche and human beings were meant to be constantly bombarded like this all the time. And I know at the beginning of this year, I took like a social media cleanse. So I couldn't delete my accounts because of the sort of public figure thing, but I just didn't post anything, and I didn't look. And in reality, I felt so good. I actually felt so good. So by the time I returned, I could also be like, well, I'm not going to engage in this toxic Twitter debate, you know? I don't gain value from it. So I'm going to leave it as such. So even negotiating with yourself on the mental health and emotional thing is important. And I think sometimes negotiating with yourself is maybe the hardest thing, because you're hardest on yourself as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Fasiha. I think I'm going to end it there. Thank you very much. That was incredibly valuable. I'm sure all the girls really gained something from it. Thank you very, very much for joining us once again. And I hope we see you again at future sessions as well. Thank you very much.
Definitely. Thank you for having me. And I'll also just leave my, how you can contact me and stuff in the chat box. So
Please do. That would be amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, ladies, I just wanted to go back quickly, because there was a question that was posed by, which Rita spoke to briefly, but I just want to read Rita's answer as well from the question. Farah asked, let's say in my first job interview, and they offer me a salary that I know is relatively low according to stats, should I accept it since it's my first, or should I speak up? And this was Rita's answer, which I'm going to read to you. The chronology of you is important before you even consider the salary. You need to be clear about yourself and why you applied for the job. What is most important? Experience, the money, networking, exposure. If you are clear about that, then you can define what you are willing to take and not. Then you consider the other. Is the money the most important thing for them, or having a young, smart woman in the position, or simply bringing someone on board? You match the two through the process of understanding, and you should know how and whether to negotiate. And that is exactly what Rita mentioned earlier, in terms of the way you look at the framework and use it as an ongoing process, not just as a once-off or separate elements. They all come together in terms of any negotiation. So ladies, we're now going to break into our circles, and we will have an hour in the circle. I just want to say thank you again to Fasiha. That was so insightful. Thank you very much. And please can we give her a wonderful G4G thank you. And we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you so, so much. Rita, can we go ahead? Ladies, what we're going to talk about in the circles, you're going to go through the key concepts again, please. And then also maybe practice some role plays. Have a look at some of the things that the girls are struggling with that you think that they might need help on, and see if you could practice a little bit and give them some help on doing that. And
Val?
Yes.
Sorry, I don't know if I know we're running out of time. Just to Rita's answer with regards to accepting whether to know what to accept. I just wanted to point out one thing at the same time, is that where you find yourself often is that in your first job you have you have the option, not the optionality, but you always have this internal argument, I need the money and I need to get, but even though it might be the lowest salary, but I need the money, and that often can put you on the back foot in later on in your career. And I'm speaking from experience, when it comes to a point where you know your worth, but I need the money is something that actually gets you in the back foot. So I mean, we can discuss it more in the circles, but I just wanted to share that with and never to let that only guide your thinking or your decision making.
So, Nabila, the important thing is now to always understand you have options. And that you're not only negotiating. A job is not only about the money. There's experience, there's such and such. So sometimes you even take a low salary and you're unhappy with it. But for you not to be demotivated and then start performing poorly in that position, you start counting the other blessings. Okay, it's an opportunity for me to exercise this skill. It's an opportunity for me to network. So even if you ultimately accept a salary that you're unhappy with, it's not what you wanted, realize that you're building your case and you're saying to yourself, 1, 2, 3, 4, these are the things that I am getting out of it, which allows you to perform better. But if you lock yourself and say it is only about the money, that is where people make a mistake. So the point is to keep, the message is, as you say yourself, what is my position? Not to only look for one thing, but to look for many things and acknowledge those many things. Because when you reevaluate those different things, you might actually realize it's actually worth it. And then you go in happy and you also know what you're getting out of that job. But it's a very good point that you raise.
But, and Rita, you have to be deliberate about that thinking though. Because back when I started my first job, I was not deliberate about that thinking. So only like a year after that, I get to a organization, and you might be lucky to have good leaders that force you in that direction or what have you. But if you're not deliberate in the beginning to say, it might be the lowest salary, but this is what I'm gaining, this is where I'm going to prove myself, and you're deliberate about that, you actually will yourself forward faster.
Exactly. And that's why we are saying, as you prepare yourself for the negotiation, we actually say to people, write it down. I do. When I'm going in to negotiate for a tender, I don't just appear. I actually write it down and I make a case for myself so that by the time I arrive, and it's actually part of communication, you know, in your head, you're ticking off, you're ticking off, you're ticking off. So it is a very good practice. It's one of the things that people should be doing. You know, you write it down and you debate with yourself and you say, okay, these are my positions of strength.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And as women, what happens is if you do that, what I found myself in my first job, I was actually justifying why I needed a salary increase because I needed to pay bills. I need to cover expenses. Instead of being deliberate at the beginning and say, listen, I deserve this because I'm good at what I do. I know what I bring to the table. I was finding myself, especially in male conversations, saying, oh, you know, I have this bill to pay. I have to, and that comes from a self-worth conversation, self-esteem conversation. So being deliberate has a lot of benefit for you upfront.
Absolutely. That's great. So are we ready? Should I split people into the rooms now?
Welcome back, everyone. How are you all doing?
Good, we good.
We good.
Good. All right. I want to hear from the circles. What happened? Who wants to go first? Come on. Got to be volunteers out there somewhere. Come on.
No problem.
Yes, Alice. You are always number one. I'm telling you, you are the girl. Fantastic.
So I'm from group 5, ICE. So in our circle, we did a role play in terms of like negotiation using the U strategy, and the negotiation was between the mentees, where one mentee wanted to start up a women's shelter, and the other mentee was a company representative, and so she was looking for funding from the company. And then from there on, everybody shared their own stories where in their personal lives where we had to engage in communication. In negotiation, whether it was at school or in our personal lives. And then towards the end, we spoke about key skills when it comes to negotiating. First, you need to make sure that you build relationships in negotiations. You need to make sure that you're an active listener and also synthesize. So take in what everybody else is saying and also build an argument. And then we also spoke about acknowledging others and what is said. And then we spoke about clarity. So you need to be clear in your communication when it comes to negotiating. And then it's also important to brainstorm ideas, brainstorm alternatives. If the points that you came up with was not necessarily agreed upon, you need to brainstorm. And then you also need to make sure that you ask questions in order to make sure that you understand what the others or other people in the negotiation are saying. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You summed it up so well. That was brilliant. Thank you so much. There's nothing, you didn't miss a single thing there. Who's next?
I'd like to go next, please.
Go ahead.
Yes, so I'm representing Group 6 Superstars. So what we went through, we first summarized what our guest speaker was speaking about today. So it was a matter of what did each individual learn from what she said. So just to summarize a few points, we said the key insights that we learned is you have to be able to be brave enough. So be brave enough to stand up for yourself and be brave enough to know, okay, I can be able to do this. So you have to be able to like stand up for yourself and represent yourself. And another thing, to know your worth. Be able to rate yourself and be able to say no in some of the aspects. And also, as we are people, we are not perfect. You need to be able to accept failure and work through it. You need to know that like failure is like stepping stones for you to be able to reach your goal. And we also shared one of our scenarios, or rather experiences, about negotiating. And one of us had a story of having to negotiate with their boyfriend because the boyfriend wanted to have sexual relations and they didn't want to. So it came back and took us to the you aspect, that okay, you are in a relationship, but at the end of the day, you need to put yourself first. And you need to know that, okay, I am not ready, but I love, even though you might love that person, you have to like be able to put yourself first. And we all related to it because it has happened probably to a few of us at some point. And in order to be able to negotiate, we had to come up with an aspect of going into a negotiation and being open-minded. So being able to communicate and being open-minded and understanding another person as well. So yeah, just to summarize, that's what we went through.
It was so, I loved your practical examples, and I think it's examples that all of us can relate to. So thank you so much for explaining so well. That was really great, Kublana. Thank you so much. Well done. Who's going to go next? Nyasha?
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
So, I am from the Group 1, the Female Prodigies. So we basically started by discussing what we took from the speaker. And some of the key things we took from the speaker was that you need to be clear about what you want when negotiating. So always be prepared, have your research done. Even though you're prepared and you have your research done, it doesn't always guarantee you a win. And that's okay. You need to accept that sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. It is important to not compromise your own values in any form of negotiation. You must know what is negotiable and what is not negotiable. And then we discussed some of the key things besides yourself, others, and understanding when it comes to negotiating, which is communication skills. Communication skills, it's very imperative when it comes to negotiating, as well as active listening. So you're not there to just state your case, but you're also listening and taking into consideration another person's thought process. And lastly, we did a bit of role play and discussed the reason we sometimes lose negotiations is because we're too nice. So we need to be strong to advocate for ourselves, our family, and the community. That's it.
Thank you so much, Yasha. So good. Thank you very much. I love the last bit, advocating for yourself and the community. So important. All right, who's going to go next? Who's next? Come on, girls. You must have nominated someone. I see our Authentic Diamonds representative is not on. I think she was having load shedding issues. Anybody else from Authentic Diamonds who wants to speak? No? Fortunate? Don't you want to speak on our behalf, please? Okay. Any other teams? Nabila, do you want to summarize what went through, what happened in our group? I see none of the girls on the call.
Yeah, sure. So I think a lot of what the previous groups have been through, we touched on, but I think most importantly, we focused on the foundations that make healthy negotiation, which is self-worth, self-care, self-love. Those things that are not only essential, but actually ensure that when you're negotiating, you're not letting go of any of your values and any of the things that you hold dear to you. So, and I think our conversation centered more around personal and emotional negotiations, which is important. We also had just great discussion with everyone in the team about how they're feeling and the types of negotiations they've had to go through. And you know, our mentees are fantastic. They know how, they are such strong women. And so I think that's a summary of the crux of what we discussed, is basically negotiating, especially when it comes to personal and emotional negotiations, from a place of self-worth and self-love.
Nabila, do any of the other mentors want to add something? I don't think we've had feedback from all the groups. I'm not sure which ones are missing.
I think Lolwetu is speaking on our behalf.
Okay, Lolwetu, go ahead.
Okay, afternoon, ladies. So I'm from the Unlimited Power Crow group. Essentially what we went through in our session was, we started off by just like discussing what the speaker spoke about, the video we were supposed to watch. And I think a couple of the important concepts that came up is that the U framework it's constantly moving up and down. You must take in information, reevaluate, and so forth. And then also listening to understand what the person you're negotiating with is saying. And then we went into our fears around negotiations. So things like rejection and age and, you know, the fact that you're a woman came up. And basically how we address these, specifically with rejection first, is that rejection comes, but what's important is to learn from it. If there's constructive criticism, pick that up and move forward and do better. And then with your age, really just gauging what you've done so far and how that's significant and that makes you important. Yes, you may not have the experiences yet, but you've achieved things and you need to focus on that, the positive and not the negative. And yeah, that was basically our conversation. Thank you.
Oh, Rachel, you really described everything so well. And I love those last points, so important, about bringing what you bring, the value you bring to the table. That is the most important. Who else? I think we've got one more group that hasn't gone, is that right? Has everyone spoken?
Hasn't gone. Pretty, are you here in Kutateng?
I don't see Pretty on the call.
In Kutateng? No?
Hi, sorry. I was having network problem. I'm so sorry.
No problem, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm from group 2, Hair Inspiration. So we talked about why do we need to negotiate, where we emphasized on the you yourself part of the principles, and we shared our negotiating experiences. And also Ma'am Joyce also shared hers, where we by that we learned more on how to spot negotiations, because most of the time we do get involved in negotiation, but we don't really realize that we are actually in those negotiations. And to better things this time, we have to think of the principles in our mind, like others, yourself, others, and also understanding. We also emphasized on how mental health is important when it comes to negotiating. Yeah, and how some negotiations can be tough. Maybe your salary, when it's your first job, you feel like you don't have experience, so everything is fine. Or because, yeah, we are in South Africa, there's unemployment, and yeah, those kind of things. So we learned how to deal with tough situations in negotiating. Thank you.
Girls, I must say, I'm looking at the girls from since session 1. We're only in session 4, and the difference and the enthusiasm and the confidence that you bring every time you give feedback. And we're seeing different people speaking now. You know, in the beginning we only had some girls who were speaking, and now I'm seeing the quieter girls are starting to come and stand and say and they're speaking so well and clearly. So I just want to really say that's absolutely fantastic. Is there any of the other groups, before we do just one more thing before I'd like to do any other groups, or is that it? So one of the key aspects of this session is shining a spotlight, and I think it's so important that as women we always raise each other up, as you know from our women's prayer. And so what I would like is, if you would like to say something nice or something, shine a spotlight on anyone within the mentorship group who's here today, please would you speak up? I would love to hear anything that you would like to say about any of the mentees or mentors. Shine a spotlight, girls. It's our weekend. Let's make each other shine.
Well, I'd like to shine a spotlight on all of us for the consistency and for the appreciation and the love that we have for this group and the dedication. I just want to say thanks, guys. Let's pull up until the end line. Yeah, at the end goal. You get what I'm saying? So snap to you guys, all of you.
Thank you, Charmaine. That's so beautiful. Thank you. Anybody else?
Hi, Belle.
Yes, Safura.
I just want to congratulate all the mentees, especially Ice, because I've seen them grow since session 1. The leadership skills that they have displayed are, quite amazing. They've come out, they've been able to speak, they've been able to communicate effectively, they've been able to give us practical examples all the time, which means that, there is some difference being made. And I feel happy about that. And I feel grateful for this group. And yes, I just want to make sure that, the mentees know that, we are with them till the end. And I hope that they decide to stay till the end. And well done to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Safura, especially when you're not feeling well. Thank you for those beautiful words, and I hope you're feeling better soon. Thank you for sharing with us. I'd like to shine a spotlight on Fortunate. Yeah. She really wasn't feeling well today, and just really wasn't up for today. But you know what? She showed up, and she added such huge value to our circle today, and by being very vulnerable. And I think it was hard for her to be vulnerable, but she really came to the core. And I think that's what being part of these circles is about, is showing your vulnerable self and telling your story and sharing so that others can help you, or you can help others by your story. So I just want to shine a spotlight on Fortunate. Thank you, Fortunate, for doing that. We really value you. Thank you. Anybody else?
Can I go?
Yes.
I'd like to shine a spotlight on Preeti from the Inspiration group. She was the one who represented us last time and this week as well. And it's not like she's feeling, oh, I'll do it. She doesn't like always jump and say, I'll do it. She's always like, oh no, I'm afraid, but she's able to just jump in and do it afraid. So I'm really so proud of her. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am.
Well done, pretty. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
Hi,
Martina?
ladies. Thank you. I would like to shine this light on Lolwetu. She she took on the challenge. She gave the feedback at a very last second, and thank you. As well as Nonduli, so she's actually not feeling well. She can't speak because she has tonsillitis, but she's still pitched, and we appreciate that. Basically, a whole circle, man. I mean, Mapula is walking around looking for network everywhere. and then we have Haukalo was actually negotiating today, which was a nice thing to see. That even though we're doing the session, she still implements some of the things. So yeah, like unlimited power crawl does the most. So grinding, yeah.
Yes, I would like to shine a spotlight on Lebohang. She always struggles with a network, but she does her best to make sure that she joined us. We even tried with WhatsApp at some stage, and then she said, okay, stop it, I'm back online with Zoom, and I like the spirit that she doesn't give up. She always tries, and she let us know to say, I'm struggling now, but then we see what we can do. So she has always said electricity, but she has not missed a session. She makes a plan. She's a woman with a plan. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
In our group, I think I want to shine the spotlight to Safora. Actually, I was worried when Zineid said she's not coming. And then Safora said she's not feeling well. And I said, oh, I'm going to be alone in this cycle this weekend. Then around 12 o'clock, me and Safora, we spoke, and she said, I'm still not well, Gloria, but I will come. And thank you, Safora, for really coming and for your participation in the cycle. Thank you very much.
Present and committed. Beautiful.
Yes.
Present and committed. Those are the mentors you have in your circles. Amazing women, all of them. All right. Anybody else?
Can I go?
Oh, can Sani go ahead? Sorry,
I'd like to shine a spotlight on two girls from our group. Alice, first of all, she has been like an inspiration to like almost all of us. It's really amazing to see people grow that you actually don't even know if you have never met face to face, that you're actually so happy for them. So I'm so proud of Alice. And the other person is Katleho. Katleho is, I don't know if I should say she's my friend, but I'm really close to her. And when she started in the circle, she was very shy, and she was like, I'm so shy. And she was telling everybody that, and I was like, Ganjan, Katleho, how are you shy? Like, that was my initial thought, because I'm like, I know you're so outspoken, but she's coming out of her shell, and it's really amazing to see her come out as well and lead us. So I'd like to shine a spotlight on those two.
Yes, beautiful. Violet, you were next.
I would like to shine a spotlight to all the mentees on the group. You know, you will appreciate when you see how much these young ladies are so inspired and motivated. No one is even pushing that much for them to be part of this program, but they all seem to know why they're here. And it's inspiring even for us to see such young women who really wants to take up leadership and really make a difference. It's when you have seen with the other groups how difficult it has been. I want to say to you ladies, UJ Mentor G4G for this year, No, you've been amazing, and keep up the good work. And power to the coordinating team. You guys are flying. Well done.
Let me say something. One other mentee, Fortunate. So I personally know Fortunate since 2017, and she was shy. She wouldn't say anything, and now it's like she's a totally different person. She actually speak out. Like, I went through the last session's video and she said a speech. I was there like, oh my gosh, I was tearing up. So I am so proud of her. Thank you.
Yay, Fortunate. Anybody else? Oh, girls, you are amazing. All right. Anybody else that, before I sort of wrap up and talk about our homework for next time, is there anything else that anyone would like to give feedback on or share?
Spotlight and position of strength, Val. Just do that connection.
No, you go ahead. Come on, you go ahead.
So first of all, this is a very healthy thing to do. Whether you're at home, whether you're with your friends, whether you're with your lecturers, if that day they're looking good, just say it to them. There's nothing as nice as giving positive energy, okay? Because ultimately it comes back to you and you also feel nice. All of you who have said something nice about someone else, you will see how nice you as well feel. It's very uplifting. But the other reason why we now are encouraging you to shine a spotlight, and try and shine a spotlight at least every day or at least once a week, is to allow you guys to begin to feel powerful enough so that when you're beginning your negotiation, you're negotiating from a position of strength. So for example, for Loluetu in our group, honestly, I mean, she stepped up at the last moment, like Oratile pointed out. That will be the first thing I'm going to say to her tomorrow. You know, Loluetu, this is twice that you have stepped up for us. But I want Loluetu, for example, to begin to understand that we perceive her as a person who steps up to the challenge. So shine that spotlight, because what you're doing for your sister is that you're helping your sister write down or begin to understand her position of strength. This is how we can help ourselves. Instead of waiting for someone else to come and help us, we can actually begin to reinforce and tell ourselves we are powerful, so that no one day even needs to tell us. We know we are powerful. So my sisters, and now I'm not talking to my mentors, I'm talking to all of you in your equal status. Sisters, let's tell each other every day how wonderful they are, and be specific. You know, I love your smile. I love your positive energy. Oratile, I love the way you never let a task go down. So say it every day, and it will become nature, and we will one day truly feel powerful. We don't need to borrow the concept. We will be powerful. That's why we shine the spotlight, huh? Okay.
Thank you, Rita. You see, you say it so beautifully. I could never have done it as beautifully as you did. So thank you. That's why you had to do it.
But you know, it's always about the power of strength, because I worry a lot. And even in our group, we didn't get to role play because we were still reinforcing to each other and getting rid of all the challenges and the misconceptions we have about what holds us back. We are young, we are inexperienced, we are Black, we are woman. We are woman, that's strength. We are young, that is strength. I wish I was younger, you know? So we see it the other way. But thanks a million, Val. You've also done a brilliant job. So thank you so much for leading us through the negotiations.
But
On that note, Val, I just wanted to say, from the time I logged in onto I can't put my video on because of connection, but Rita, I can't stop looking. You look very beautiful today. So I can't stop looking at your video.
I'm shy now.
But Crystal, sorry, you had your hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to add on what Rita said. I put a post on the chat. It says the most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have it. They don't have any, by Alice Walker. And I think today's session has shown us we do have the power. So let's use it wisely. Thank you.
All right. So ladies, so we have had a good session in terms of discussing the framework and having an excellent guest speaker. But I think what Rita is saying is taking that framework, the two things she talked about today, knowing your power and using that framework continuously in any negotiation that you're in, from the most simple one to the most difficult one. And you'll be amazed, the more you practice it, the easier it becomes, okay? And that all those steps that you've learned to now, from building trust to courageous leadership to the art of communication, as you are honing all those skills that you're using, you will be able to negotiate better and easier every time. It's not a big technical word. It's actually a conversation. It's a dance. One of our other mentors always says, it's a dance, okay? You imagine that you're going 2 steps forward and 2 steps back. And maybe you'll twirl around a bit, and then you'll twirl the other way, you know? And we all dance very well. I've seen that. You guys are all brilliant dancers. So think about that dance and think about how you approach it, how you help each other achieve what you both need to achieve in any negotiation that you go into, and bring your power. You are limitless, girls. You are absolutely limitless. You are capable of doing anything and being absolutely amazing. You are leaders in the circles in every way, shape, and form. Okay, so just for next week, next 2 weeks' time, sorry, it feels like next week, in 2 weeks' time, just to know, we will be doing what we call running for public office, or what we like to know it as leadership and service. And so what I want you to think about for your next session, this is your homework. 1, do the feedback forms. 2, watch the prep video, which we will share with you after the session, okay? And then 3, I want you to think about your environment, whether it be your home, your school, university, wherever it may be. I want you to think about where you might find an area where you can do something or you can be a leader in that space, okay? Where you can fundamentally change something around you for some people, whether it be 2 people, whether it be 5 people, whether it be 20 people. I want you to think about your leadership and where you could possibly apply that in a service way by servicing and looking after others. All right, so that's key to next week's homework. And then we will, I think you must also think about and read about people who have done great service. And there are so many examples at the moment. I mean, look at Fasiha Hassan. Isn't that somebody who's offering so much service? Go and research up about her. See what she does. See the changes that she's made in her space for someone so young. There are so many examples. Think about them and do some research on them. And other than that, that's it from me. I don't know, Pusu, if you've got a choice for this week musically, or if anyone else wants to add anything before we go. No? So.
Hi, ladies.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Ortiz.
So we know I don't know if everybody's aware of what's going on in Zim, and we have a few members who are actually currently there. So I would like us to have like a moment of silence in solidarity with the people who are fighting.
Thank you, Oratile, for raising that very, very important thing. Thank you for that reflection moment.
Thank you.
Anybody else? All right, girls, we will see you in 2 weeks' time. Get those dancing shoes on. Put your videos on so we can take a photo, please. Here we go, I'm taking photos. Smile. Dance. And more, come on.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
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 Thank you.
ladies.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Love you.